Copy, taking gunfire on 9th Street at the DMV. Gunfire coming from a southerly direction north of the DMV.
That deputy is in serious but stable condition. Later, around 7 a.m., police discovered the body of a man near an Amtrak station less than a mile away from the police department. The victim was shot in the head from close range, and investigators believe this homicide is connected to the shooting this morning. Within the past couple minutes, authorities released a picture of the gunman. They say without a doubt he set out to kill police officers, and this is the third time that members of law enforcement have been ambushed here in California in just the past couple of weeks. David.
The scene playing out in Paso Robles, California tonight. Will, thank you. We had been reporting here on the growing pressure across this country from demonstrators and supporters to take down Confederate symbols. And tonight, late word, Nascar is taking action, banning the Confederate flag at all Nascar events. Driver Bubba Wallace wearing a t-shirt saying, "I can't breathe, Black Lives Matter" at the Atlanta Motor Speedway in recent days. U.S. military leaders have expressed a willingness to discuss renaming bases named after Confederate generals. But tonight, President Trump says that won't happen, saying they are part of a great American heritage. Here's our chief White House correspondent, Jonathan Karl.
President Trump today firmly shot down the idea of changing the names of military bases named after Confederate generals, tweeting, quote, "My administration will not even consider the renaming of these magnificent and fabled military installations." In case anybody missed his tweets, he dispatched his press secretary to read his words aloud.
These monumental and very powerful bases have become part of a great American heritage and a history of winning, victory, and freedom.
It comes just after the Army announced the Secretary of Defense and the Secretary of the Army are open to a bipartisan discussion on the topic. Around the country, signs of the Confederacy are coming down. Now NASCAR is announcing a ban on Confederate flags at all events. Tonight, racing star Bubba Wallace's car will bear the words, "Black Lives Matter." There are 10 U.S. Army bases named after Confederate soldiers. Among those calling for that to change is retired General David Petraeus, who wrote in The Atlantic of the, quote, "irony of training at bases named for those who took up arms against the United States and for the right to enslave others." He added, "We do not live in a country to which Braxton Bragg, Henry L. Benning, or Robert E. Lee can serve as an inspiration. Acknowledging this fact is imperative." Today, the president wouldn't answer questions on his decision. While the White House makes an impassioned defense of bases named for pro-slavery Confederate soldiers, the president has yet to propose any specific reforms of police practices in the wake of George Floyd's death. On Capitol Hill, Republicans have tasked the only African-American Republican senator to take the lead in coming up with a plan.
We should all want to follow the lead as it relates to making sure that we get something accomplished and not just having pieces of legislation that are for show.
The White House press secretary said today the president is working, quote, "quietly and diligently to come up with a plan to address the concerns of the protesters," but we have heard nothing specific. So far, all we have heard is what he opposes. We are told the president opposes the idea of limiting the immunity now enjoyed by most police officers. That's an idea that Democrats and some Republicans say would make it easier to hold the police accountable for their actions.
David, John Karl live at the White House. John, thank you. I want to get right to ABC's Martha Raddatz tonight because Martha, the Army had said the defense secretary was in fact open to discussing renaming military bases named after Confederate generals. But you heard what the president said today, essentially saying this won't happen. So where does this stand tonight?
Well, David, the decision is technically up to an assistant secretary of the Army, but given what Trump has said, that would likely be professional suicide. But as you know, it was just last week that Secretary of Defense Mark Esper spoke out publicly against the president's threat to use active duty military to quell protests. And there has also been a growing chorus of retired military officers blasting Trump's decision making. So you can't rule out the base names changing, but for now, that seems unlikely, David.
All right, Martha, our thanks to you as well. Now to news this evening on the coronavirus, the number of cases spiking in several states across this country, and there's news tonight on a potential vaccine. Tens of thousands of Americans volunteering to get injected with potential vaccines on the horizon. So what could this mean for any timeline for the rest of the country? Here's Matt Gutman on that.
Tonight, the U.S. government saying tens of thousands of volunteers will soon receive injections with one of 3 experimental vaccines. Those injections, part of a 3rd phase of vaccine trials this summer, the stage before possible approval. Dr. Anthony Fauci now saying there are no guarantees, but he's cautiously optimistic about at least one of them working.
We could have a vaccine either by the end of this calendar year or in the first few months of 2021.
Moderna beginning phase 3 trials in July, followed by the University of Oxford and AstraZeneca's vaccine in August, and Johnson & Johnson in September. The goal to test their vaccine safety and effectiveness. That is at least 20 states plus Puerto Rico seeing increases in new cases and 8 states reporting rising hospitalizations. In Texas, hospitalizations jumped 40% since Memorial Day. Officials there say it's too early to tell if that's because of the reopening, the protests, or both. And in Arizona, hospital systems tell us they're maxing out of ICU beds. In mid-May, the projection for COVID deaths was 600.
Right.
Now the projection is 4,500.
Correct.
That's a pretty significant change.
That's an alarming trajectory.
David, the goal of a phase 3 trial is to determine how well a vaccine works. That's why they're casting an enormously wide net, up to 90,000 volunteers from all walks of life. Half of them will be given a placebo, the other half the actual vaccine, and it will later be determined who came down with coronavirus and how many of them show the presence of antibodies. David.
And we know you'll stay on this. Matt Gutman, our thanks to you again tonight as well. We're also following it.
Let's go all the way back. Right.
News tonight involving the spike in cases right. Wednesday night, enough is enough, pleading with them to stop the pain of police brutality. Breaking down, asking what was his brother's life worth. We have learned prosecutors and that former officer Derek Chauvin were closing in on a deal on state murder and federal civil rights charges until the day before his arrest. Chauvin now faces up to 40 years behind bars if convicted on all charges. And tonight, as we come on the air, an urgent hunt now for a man who opened fire at a police station, a deputy wounded, shot in the face. Another person found shot dead nearby, and we have it all covered for you. We're going to begin with ABC's Alex Perez in Minneapolis again tonight.
Tonight, the stunning revelation as prosecutors mulled charges against fired Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin. He was angling for a deal to plead guilty on federal civil rights charges and to murdering George Floyd. As prosecutors were walking up to the podium on May 28th, the deal had just fallen apart.
We thought we would have another development that I could tell you about. Unfortunately, we don't at this point.
Chauvin, charged with third-degree murder the next day, upgraded to second-degree the following week.
Mr. Floyd, what do you hope to tell the committee today?
Word of those negotiations coming as George Floyd's brother, Philanese, emotionally testified before lawmakers on Capitol Hill.
You don't do that to a human being. You don't even do that to an animal. His life mattered. All our lives matter. Black lives matter. I just wish I could get them back. Those officers, they get to live. For him to do something like that, it had to be premeditated, and he wanted to do that.
And intentional.
Yes, sir.
And tonight, those chants on the streets turning into demands for reform. Minneapolis Police Chief Madaria Arredondo, faced with the possibility his department could be disbanded, unveiling his own plans for change today, revealing the department will no longer negotiate their current contract with the police union, and new real-time technology to track cops accused of misconduct and intervene. Chauvin had 18 complaints against him, but was only disciplined twice.
I'm going to weigh in real quick on what's being said here.
Disciplined.
The main thing is the is the Confederacy Nascar news that they are banning all Confederate flags from their race fields. You know, this has come up before in regards towards how the South, a lot of people still hold dear to the Confederate battle flag that was decommissioned in North Carolina shortly of or even during the Civil War. Decommissioned, indicating that it was to be put aside and no longer used as a government entity, a functionable government entity. And of course, during the Civil War, you also had Union soldiers that was glorified in similar ways. It is taken this long before now people are going to look upon that event as it being a very, very stainful event. The same thing as swastika Nazism stickers or emblems or decals would be looked upon by the Jewish people towards an assault. I hope and pray that my brothers and sisters will forgive me towards the way that I flowed the Confederate flag in regards to anti-battle, against anti-slavery, anti-bloodshed. I guess this will pretty well put an end to the fact that these Confederate monuments will be taken out of plain view and put into some sort of a museum to where they can be viewed upon as a period of time in history that will be just as dark and just as demented as the time whenever the Holocaust took place. These events that are unraveling in such of a fast degree that we must take time in deciphering what we're going to do, because what we do today will be a stained image towards what we are tomorrow. Even by renaming some of these institutions that have been named in honor of various federal soldiers, regardless whether it was federal soldiers in the South or federal soldiers in the North. But once more, this open check that these police officers has had pertaining to immunity between one agency versus another agency needs to be stopped, because this is the main reason why that the problem continues to keep festering, and we continue to keep repeating this cycle again and again and again, just like a dog returning back to its vomit or a hog returning back to its waller. We have to understand that these closures, I used the wrong word. We have to understand that these policies that these police canopies are using are not bringing closures to these horrible, horrible people that has these horrible, horrible problems, but actually it's only putting a band-aid, kicking the can down the road, and rather than addressing the problem that's in that particular law enforcement agency, it's only being winked at and ignored. So hopefully this event that has come about, and yes, there is spikes happening all over America pertaining to the coronavirus, but hopefully the people that was willing to sacrifice their good health by getting out and making these type of bold statements in protest, hopefully there will be a re-overhaul of the system that has been corrupted now from the core, rotten to the very core of where it began whenever we set up these type of agencies that will bring dissatisfaction to the American people. If a person is a thief and they're in the police department, they need to be brought out and chastised and retribution fall up onto their lives the same way if you're a regular citizen. And to cover up these problems that has been going on, not just with the deputies that work for these agencies, but also the chiefs, the captains, the judges, the mayors, even the attorneys, just because they've got deep pockets and just because they know the right people, to cover up their imperfections and not allowing for the general public to know about their imperfections is an unjust due to society. And no, nobody's trying to pick on nobody, regardless whether it be the Confederacy that was wrong during the time of the slavery, of the Civil War, or picking on various bad cops. But the Bible is very clear that we must get the mote out of our own eyes before we worry about getting the beam out of our other eye, our brother's eye, because if we're not going to do that, then the Bible says that they both have leadeth off into the ditch, and they both be blinded into the same area. And that's basically where we are right now pertaining to these law enforcement agencies that want to protect these people with these problems, regardless whether they be a thief, a liar, regardless whether their inadequacies are so horrible that they should have been fired from that type of not just that particular precinct, but that type of job. In other words, that they wouldn't even have stood good towards being a police guard at night, towards operating a fence somewhere, going up and down, while trucks was going in and out, because they did not have the right stuff to be that law enforcement person, male or female. There needs to be transparency towards these officers that are basically ruining people's lives. And if they're not ruining people's lives by bringing death illegitimately to various people like George Floyd, but they're bringing illegitimacies to these people by marking them up and staining them and riding their backs and keeping their feet to the fire and not giving them no type of break because they've got biased opinions and they've got old grudges and vendettas towards various people that has made mistakes in their lives. There's not going to be no room for reform in the eyes of society as long as you have a group of people that is steadily badgering, hindering, and not giving people a second and a third chance that does make a mistake. Especially if those that are doing the badgering, if those that are doing the grudging are the ones that's got problems to begin with. Once more, what does the Bible say about this type of activity? It says that if the blind lead the blind, they both shall lead it off into the ditch. You wonder how come we're 2-point-something million incarcerated prisoners, either in jail or in prison? This pretty well speaks volumes about where we are right now as a society in here in America that has one of the highest ratings of arrest than any other country in the world. Rotten to the core. Whenever you have the governor and the assistant governor and the body, the city council that overlooks these problems in their departments, and then you got the union under the blue law that protects them from being revealed. you just got exacerbating problem upon exacerbating problem that will just add insult to misery that'll put us where we are right now. I am so sorry that I, as an individual, have never looked upon various symbols and the Confederate flag as well as the Union flag during that period, looked upon to it the same way as the Jewish people would look upon the swastika Nazism period of time whenever the Holocaust took place. I am so sorry that the inadequacies of my ability to be insensitive in that way should never ever have tarnished society in understanding their grief, understanding their pain, and understanding where they come from. Now, we can use the analogy all day long and say, well, it was the black man that portrayed the black man by bringing him from Africa to begin with as slaves and selling him as slaves that actually helped to bring all this to a head. Or we can even go back further than that if we wanted to and say, well, it was the pharaohs during the days of the Egyptians that first put up the sign that said no blacks welcome in their area at that time. But the fact of the matter is, we know that various cultures and various generations has made mistakes in the past, and we as a society must stop making the same mistakes if we as a society are going to grow, prosper, and yes, live in peace and utopia. We're going to have to learn to live together. Colonize. Just as the Bible talks about, to let the wheat grow with the tares until time of harvest. We're going to have to learn to get along, regardless whether we're black, white, green, or yellow, regardless whether we're rich or poor, educated or non-educated. We're going to have to, if we're going to see the abundance of the meek inheriting the earth, just as the Bible has already predicted. So as we stop in a sigh of understanding our past, let's not keep continually making the same mistakes for the future, because there won't be a future if we don't understand the inadequacies that has happened in our past, regardless whether you be from the South, regardless whether you be from the North, regardless whether you be from the East of America or the West of America. We must stop continually making the same mistakes and learn that the Bible is the main origin that we have to live by and live from if we as a society is going to be a thriving, productive, peaceful society in the future. We have to learn to integrate, regardless whether we be Afghanistans, Pakistans, Iranians, or Saudi Arabians. We're going to have to learn to integrate, to work together if we're going to pull through this. And to make the same mistakes again and again and again, and to have a system that covers up inadequacies the way that the blue law and the way that the union has done is just absolutely appalling to me. It's appalling. But I'm pretty sure it's appalling to the black race that they still dramatize and idolize the era during the Civil War versus looking on it the way that the Jews look upon the risation of the Nazis. We as a society are going to have to be sensitized the way that the system has sensitized us, and we're going to have to be more sensitive to other people's feelings and to other people's likes and dislikes if we as a society are going to thrive and get along. This guy with 18 complaints should have been run out of the precinct probably within half of those times, and if the right people was doing the right jobs, they could have caught it to the point that they could have stopped and saved George Floyd's life. So let it be known a day after that Mr. George Floyd has not died in vain, and the tears that his brother was projecting a while ago are the same tears that I have personally for all the victims out there, including myself, who have been victimized by various corrupt law enforcement agencies, beginning right down the road here in Kenton, Tennessee, and spreading out up into Kentucky, Oklahoma, Georgia, and yes, Tennessee. In my personal life, that a lot of people are very aware of what has occurred. These evil entities are out to tear, harm, hurt, and just like the Bible talks about, out to kill, steal, and destroy. And if we don't rip them open to the point of being able to look from the outside in to see who these people are, towards bringing transparency to not only the people, but bringing transparency to the agencies that created this system that is rotten to the core, we're never going to get to the root of the problem. So from this day on, as NASCAR has announced just a while ago, that all Confederacy flags will be banned from NASCAR. And really, if you look at NASCAR, NASCAR is nothing but a white man's sport. Probably 7 out of 10 is nothing but a white man's race. For NASCAR to do that is a very, very bold move for, yes, NASCAR. It is time for change here in America. It is time that we stopped and considered other people's likes and dislikes and what is fair-minded and what is not fair-minded.
Rules.
Yes.
What would have happened to someone like Chauvin who had all these complaints?
We could have intervened much earlier. If there were problematic behaviors that were brought to our attention right away, we could have made those appropriate measures.
Back on Capitol Hill, George Floyd's brother demanding more accountability for officers before anyone else is killed.
George wasn't hurting anyone that day. He didn't deserve to die over $20. I'm asking you, is that what a black man is worth? $20? This is 2020. Enough is enough.
Powerful testimony. We hear the demonstrators behind you there in Minneapolis tonight, Alex, and we also know there's late word that one of the other officers who was charged in this case, Thomas Lane, we remember he was on his 4th shift as an officer that night, a rookie. There's news on him this evening?
Well, David, according to jail records, the former officer Thomas Lane was released from jail just a short time ago. Late this afternoon, he posted $750,000 bail and has been released. You'll remember that's the officer who in court shifted blame towards the veteran officer on the scene that night, Derek Chauvin. Now, as for the changes here at the Minneapolis Police Department, the chief tells me today was just the beginning. He expects to make several announcements in the weeks ahead. David?
All right, Alex Perez leading us off again tonight. Alex, thank you. And as I mentioned at the top tonight, there is an urgent hunt at this hour for a gunman who fired on a police station in Paso Robles, California, shooting a deputy in the face. And then a body found a mile away, someone shot dead. Authorities do believe it's related. That community put on lockdown. And ABC's Will Carr is in California.
Sick We live in a very, very emotional as well as a physical sick society. And it's just like the Bible talks about, that in the last days, Satan will rise up in great wrath because he knoweth his time is short. What we're seeing is the works of evil, demonic wickedness that is at broad right now, that is bringing destruction out to kill, steal, and destroy in every way imaginable. If we as a society have ever wanted to be close or closer to God, and we needed to pray for ourselves and pray for our communities and pray for each other, now is that time. Now is that time. Thank you for listening. Good luck to all of us as we end our program here at 291 Thompson Road, and shalom. And God bless each and every one of us who are striving towards a better, righteous, glorious way to pursue our lives.